Oh, welcome, sir. Happy New Year. I don't think I've seen you since the new year.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
I want to talk about budgets and Russ Vought, my friend Russ Vought, in a minute. But what did you think about the Scott Bessent stuff today? I don't know if you heard any or saw any.
Yeah, I was able to hear some of the hearing. I've also met with him in private. I think he is impressive. I think he has a broad knowledge of economics, and he's dead on when you say that inflation is a creation of money by the Federal Reserve. Inflation is a creation and increase in the money supply. It really isn't even so much prices. Prices is a consequence of inflation. Now, part of the price of a good can be a tax. So when you attach tax to corporations or tariffs to corporations, it can raise the prices, but it doesn't cause inflation. And I think that with regard to whether tariffs are a good thing, you know, if you tell me you want to replace the personal income tax with a tariff, you got my vote. No. But if you're going to add it on to what we have, I think less taxes the better, frankly.
No, I don't know. I like that idea. I don't think we could pull it off. Replacing the income tax with tariffs might be worth a shot. But, you know, Scott told me on my radio show just after he was nominated on this tariff issue that, you know, only excess money causes long-term inflation. That was his point. And I'm surprised more people, and you just echoed it, I'm surprised more people haven't made that point. Wall Street is involved in this silly game that tariffs will be inflationary, and I fear the Federal Reserve think tariffs will be inflationary and might do some even crazier things than the Fed usually does. But that's not the issue. That's not the issue. I mean, too much money chasing too few goods, sure. Tariffs, forget about it.
Well, you have to realize some of these people are also so confused about what inflation is that they think greed causes inflation. And I always laugh at this because it's like, oh my goodness, why did these people all of a sudden become greedy now and they weren't greedy last year? I mean, it's a ridiculous notion. Inflation is a creation of new money. It's a creation of money by the Federal Reserve. And it is, yes, money exceeding the demand.
I had so many great interviews with your dad on this subject back on another network that I won't have to mention, but it's good to have you here. Senator Paul, let me play you some sound from Russ Vought, the incoming director of the Office of Management and Budget, in his confirmation hearings yesterday. Take a listen, please.
The president has promised the American people a federal government that works for all Americans, not the interests of bureaucrats and an entrenched establishment. We have $36 trillion in debt. Our fiscal house continues to be a mess. We're now in a situation where it has surpassed what we spend on defense, and we have to put forward budgets and spending plans. The budget process needs to work again.
So I gather you support Russ Vought, and you had some thoughts of your own on the runaway spending, deficits, and debt.
Yeah, I think we need to cut spending. In fact, we could start with a benchmark of maybe why don't we spend what comes in. But yeah, there's a lot of things maybe we might be able to cut, like the $400,000 for studying whether lonely rats use more cocaine than well-accustomed socialized rats, whether Japanese quail on cocaine are more sexually promiscuous. There's a few things we might be able to cut, Larry.
Few things. We're running deficits $2 trillion a year. It's about 7% of GDP, Mr. Bessent said in his hearing. So that's untenable. You have said, I saw a clip of your saying this, once again, the interest expense now exceeds our defense budget and is rising by leaps and bounds. So we have a bit of a fiscal emergency, I would say. Here's my first question to you on this subject, though. We know we have to cut spending. If Mr. Trump comes in, okay, if there's money that was appropriated but unspent, I'm thinking there's still COVID money, there's the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act money, there's some of that CHIPS bill money. If money was appropriated but not yet spent, and we're in a fiscal spending emergency of sorts, why couldn't it just be removed by the president? Just don't spend it.
Well, there is a way to do it, and it's called rescission. So in the first Trump administration, they sent $15 billion back to us, a very small amount. And yes, I voted for it enthusiastically, but we lost 2 Republicans who voted with the Democrats, and we were unable to cut $15 billion. Realistically, the Trump administration, if they could get 50 Republicans, myself and 49 others in the Senate, We should be able to cut $500 billion. I promise you, if you put someone like Elon or Vivek looking at every ratchet, screw, hammer, and wrench, there's all kinds of money to be cut everywhere, competitive bidding, but you also have to look at entitlements. Everything has to be looked at. The military has to be looked at. But if you send it back to us, then we need the votes and the courage. So people have to realize ultimately this takes Congress. It cannot be done completely by the executive branch. It's going to take Congress. But that's not an excuse. That means everybody in the land should be calling your congressman saying, I'm watching you. If you don't cut, we're bringing you home.
But I take it also, again, from Russ Vought's hearings and perhaps elsewhere, you're opposed to impoundment authority by the president. But let me just ask you this, and this is a free speech program, so you can whack away at any darn thing I say. But if the president thinks he can achieve the goals of Congress with a cheaper spend-out rate, for example. I don't know if I'm putting that the way I want to. If it's just cheaper to do what everybody wants them to do, that might be true. I don't know whether it's infrastructure or whatever. Why shouldn't he impound the rest? If he can save money by getting the same missions done more cheaply, why not impound them? Because, you know, as people have said, a couple hundred years we had impoundment authority. It was only from the early, mid-Nixon 70s that it was removed.
Right. So I have a couple of questions. First, if you impound the money, where does it go? Is it still already spent but sitting in an account, or is it not really spent and still sitting at the Treasury? Do you not actually draw it? That would make a difference to me. I'm not fully decided on this. I'm open to hearing the arguments. In general, though, the principle that Congress controls the power of the person, spends the money, and the president executes that spending is a very important principle. We haven't had a lot of discussion, either in contemporary times or in a long time, about not spending. It's a good debate to have about not spending money. I'm open to listening about it, but I'm not sure exactly where the money goes if it is impounded. Has it already been sent? Do you know the answer? Is it in limbo? Is it still uncreated? You know, where is the money? If it actually saves money, there's a possibility impoundment just sort of sits it over here and it's not spent but doesn't necessarily save money. But I'm all for saving money, and I will be open to listening to the arguments on impoundment. But rescission, actually involving Congress in the cuts, can be done simply with Republicans. It cannot be filibustered. It's a privileged vote, and rescission is the way ultimately to go that will not be challenged. There's no court challenge. There's no legal challenge. Rescission is perfectly legal, takes a simple majority, and by golly, we ought to be able to get a majority of Republicans to cut spending. If they can't, they ought to be sent home.
Well, I think you're right. I think you're right on all counts. Just one last one on the impoundment stuff. Where does the money go? Senator Paul, I just pushed the delete button. That's all. I wouldn't send it over to the next year. Delete. We're not going to spend it. That's all. We won't ask the Fed. We won't ask the Treasury to borrow for it, and we won't ask the Fed to monetize it. I just hit the delete button. And you know, that delete button could be a couple of $1 trillion. Believe it or not.
I think we have to look into that. And like I say, I'm open-minded, but I want to find out for certain where the money goes if it's impounded. There will be legal challenges to this, though.
Yes.
And I've talked to some legal experts who say that the lower courts, if they decide with the current law, will decide against the administration on impoundment. Probably the only way to actually have impoundment be legal would be to get to a Supreme Court precedent, and there's a possibility it gets revisited.
Yeah.
But it's an issue, has to be, I need to explore it more thoroughly. I need to know what happens to the money, but I know rescission works. I know rescission's legal, and it really is what the public should hear is call your representative, tell them to balance the budget, or you're coming home. We're bringing you home if you cannot vote to cut some spending.
All right. I'm with you, 100%. Senator Rand Paul, thank you, sir. We appreciate it, as always.
Thank you.
You bet.